There was.
Hi.
Sorry I couldn't be there, everybody.
We're recording, so we're ready when everyone else is.
Alrighty, let's call this meeting to order. Welcome everybody on this chilly morning. First item of consideration is the December 7th meeting minutes. Everybody have a chance to review those?
Yes.
Yes. Move approval.
Okay.
Move approval.
A second.
Got a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Could I ask a procedural point?
Yes.
I was not at the December 7th meeting, so do I technically abstain or do I move approval of the minutes? Or does it not matter? No, then,
You're not there.
all right.
Yeah, I think you can.
Okay, then I'm done. I read them, I'm good with them then. Just want to make sure.
I think that's more you're good that you've read them and that you feel like they're appropriated.
Alrighty, next item. Review of the Q4 financials.
And we have Mark here.
Excellent.
Um,
Go ahead.
no, you go ahead, kid.
No, I just had a few questions. If you're going to give sort of a summary, let's start there, and then I can ask my few questions. And
All right.
as well.
This is a pretty standard format quarterly report for the CDA. Not a lot of activity. We show our below the green and white striped area, we show our balances with our 3 buckets of CDA restricted funds. And then I also break out the business loans on the very bottom of that first page with outstanding balances and available balances for the CDA to continue that program based on 12/31/18. And then the second page is some detailed information about our current business loan activity and then 2018 facade applications and disbursements. So I'm happy to take any questions from that.
I have one question that maybe is a little bit more procedural than actual numbers, so I don't know if you're the right person to ask, but it's about the facade grants for Blue Zag and for Power Cycle. So that just seems like their application date was, I mean, over a year ago, both of them, or close to a year ago. So I guess, when does that get dispersed, and is there a reason why we have been having it pending for so long? Because both of them are, up and running businesses now. So,
Bart, did you have a chance to review that issue?
Yeah, and I talked with Eric about it. The power cycle date doesn't seem accurate to me. Did they apply last February? They're more recent.
The application date is always not indicative of when 100% of the
But they
actual
weren't even
materials are actually
approved as a
in.
business until like August.
Right,
So
right.
that, I'm thinking that date can't be accurate. And just as an update, Erica did provide me with their reimbursement request yesterday.
Okay.
So that one is in. Blue Zag, I don't have an update on as to what they're waiting for.
There's one document missing of the 4 that are required for reimbursement.
Okay.
And so they just have to get it from the bank. But the thing with like Power Cycle, and this is, again, how much hand-holding should the village and I do with these? Because there was one inspection that wasn't done until the 3rd week of January with Power Cycle, and Power Cycle thought everything was done, so their signed person obviously they weren't communicating very well. So I don't actively remind them,
sure.
and that's something I should work on.
Is there a requirement for timeline?
Yeah,
There is, and
Is that
there is.
60
It's in the agreement.
60 days?
That's signed once everything's done, but technically with Power Cycle, there was an electrical permit open through the 3rd week of January, so it's not technically done. And I know Blue's Egg, they have a temporary occupancy, but so I don't know, those are technicalities that aren't that clear in the manual.
I did follow up. Blue Zag did get full occupancy last week or recently, but they have one outstanding enforcement for a shelf in the kitchen or something. But But yeah, so these things do take a while to get finalized. They look like they're finalized and they look like they're complete, but yeah, that electrical inspection for the sign did not take place, so we could not have reimbursed it had they asked sooner.
And they did ask sooner, by the way. Yeah, they did, in the end of December, I think.
So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but they are,
So it's 60 days from the completion
The date of
of the
completion.
installation and their permits that are closed
Correct.
is when they can get reimbursed.
correct.
Okay. Got it.
Well, they can, that's when we have to give them money. That could happen 5 days after they're completed.
Yeah, they
You
could
don't
re-
have to wait 60
The
days.
agreement says that they should request it within 60 days of project completion.
Right.
They could request it the day of project
Yeah.
Right,
completion.
okay.
But if they don't request it by that 60 days, then they don't get their funds.
I don't know if that's a decision, if that's that clear, if the CDA is asked to weigh in on that. I don't know the answer to that question. I've
It
never
just seems like a
been
long
one.
time that we're sort of in the process and, you know, giving them some sort of finalized deadline might be helpful to sort
Sure.
of keep things moving.
And maybe that's part of the, I have a checklist that I go through each applicant, and one thing's required and it's bolded, but maybe they initial things off to, you understand this is the date.
Right.
You also have,
So Erica, you administer
yes,
this whole process?
yeah. Once I sit with them and go through the process and say, okay, your application and your agreement, which is usually hand in hand with it when they get approved, then I don't pay attention to it any longer, you know.
Right.
And that's something I could put in my calendar, it's like 30 days out, you know, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, we've wanted to obviously work with businesses. We understand that there's a lot of things going on, you know, in the business, and so not be too procedural on it, but keeping track of things and keeping a little bit organized. But it seems like each facade program has its own, or each facade request has its own unique issues involved in it as to what holds it up. But again, in general, I feel like we just want to present ourselves as a business partner to them and get it done in a timely manner.
Yeah,
I just-
definitely.
I just wanted to also weigh in. I think I see both sides of this coin. I mean, I do think that you don't want to pen something forever. I mean, that just creates some uncertainty there. But again, I do agree with working with the business as well. But I also had a couple of questions, and I probably knew this at one point, but I just want to make sure that I understand it now. I noticed that we don't always grant the full amount requested. Is it because the facade program is a straight reimbursement mechanism, or do we arrive at the number in some way that we grant, and who's responsible for arriving at that number? Because I noticed it was 4333 for Stone Creek, and then we gave them 3220. So
Yeah, Stone Creek was a very chaotic application where some things were done in-house, and then outdoor patios are limited to $1,500, but facade improvements, which could be, are up to $10,000. And some of the electrical, okay, is that just patios, that permanent lighting, so there was a lot of, what would you say?
Adjustments.
Adjustments, thank you. As they got further along in it, that was it, Bart and I said, no, that's really not eligible. It's maxed at 1,500, that's really patio versus overall facade, and so that's limited to 1,500. So, you know, going forward to the next application, something like that, I mean, that was my first one I really went through.
okay.
That was that detailed and trying to do in-house, that definitely is a clearer process.
Thank
For
you.
example, we granted 103 for ruckus, but it came in at 88.
Okay,
Oh,
Does that make sense?
that makes
Just because there was some ineligible expenses and they didn't spend as much and we can only reimburse 50%.
sense.
Okay. Question, do you have another question?
No, that was it for me.
Okay. Mark, just out of curiosity, and again, I should probably know this, but looking at the actual numbers, the interest income was half what it was between 2017 and 2018. I'm just trying to recall why the big drop in that.
We had a couple people pay off their loans,
Okay.
so, so that affects your interest. Also, just over
Yeah.
time, if you don't reissue new loans, you know, as principal's paid back, the interest portion of that will decline as well.
Yeah. I just forgot that there was some that had paid off. I was looking at the list and I forgot that there was some that dropped off. And then another, probably silly question at the bottom of the page, the fund balances difference between, sort of the difference between, again, 2017, 2018 is specifically the line items above subtracting from them, correct? So
Well,
restricted facade program is just the 30,000 that we had budgeted for 2018.
well, it's the difference between prior year actual, current year actual. Budget was the budget numbers. You also have to consider in the loan program that we are paying back some principal, which doesn't show on a financial statement. So all those numbers have been reviewed and updated. So that should be right where you're at. Now, I did suspend the accounting for the Kensington liquor loan.
Right.
So that balance reflects the payments that they've actually made. We can't go into a year-end and an audit review recording receivables that we don't expect to be paid. So those have all been written down at this point. So that does reflect their current balance, and it does not imply that they've got any, open invoices. So that'll, we'll see where that goes over time.
Mark, where would the money for the transportation study, which line item does it come out of?
Transportation study would probably be out of other CDA activities
Assessment and planning? Nope, that's not enough.
or planning, assessment planning if you're looking there.
I see. Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
There's that more.
Sorry, I just have one question about the, for the hours, the CDA report. So, it looks like in 2017 we were pretty much on budget, but then there was a pretty big increase for this year. I don't remember exactly why, so I don't know if we're expecting that again for this year, for 2019.
Well, that amount is reflective of the level of interaction you require of them to develop that annual report, and that varies from year to year.
Okay.
And I think that it's a great question. I would suggest this is something, again, the annual report has evolved over time, I would say, and I think this past year we probably went back to them too many times with changes and edits that in hindsight I'm not sure we really needed to do. And so I think next year I will get with Mark and staff and really talk through this before we engage them and make sure we're sticking on budget, because there doesn't really we don't have enough going on that there need to be that many back and forths. Mark, I don't know if you agree with that, or Rebecca agree with that.
I would strongly agree with that.
Can't we make them changes in-house? Do we?
So this was on us.
I think we're going to be looking at
I would say this was
proposing
on
some
us.
different processes for you moving forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Mark, I have one more question. The total at the bottom of the page is 1.1 million, basically. And we only transferred 880. How did it grow, or did we have funds in there before?
Well, the 880 was the initial, and then the transfer of all the business loans outstanding programs
Yeah.
to CDA. So those balances are now part of that fund balance.
Okay, thank you.
Just as maybe a future item for staff, and we've talked a little bit about this, I think at some point it would make sense for the CDA to talk about that, the restricted for other CDA activities balance and what the appropriate use of those funds would be. Obviously, the other two are very restricted and specific. That one, I would like to have a conversation about those funds, and as we talk about different studies and different things we may want to do, does that come out of there? And so I think be a little more intentional about that balance there and how we're using it.
That's great, Peter. We can list that on the March agenda. And when we list
Okay.
that, what we will also do is list it with a discussion of investing of the funds.
And just in general, this is all new to the CDA, this having these funds and this process. And so, just speaking personally, we don't have process procedure in place necessarily as to what we should be doing, how we should be doing it. So just so that the other members of the CDA are aware of that. So I think it's a little bit learning as we go on this because it's so new, and I just want to make sure we're, again, being intentional and correct in how we're doing it.
It's new
So if
because
people have thoughts about that, I'd be more than happy to hear them.
why is it new?
You never had money.
Well, because we really just transferred all these balances over, I guess 2 years ago was probably that when it happened.
Year and a half.
Oh,
Yeah.
from general funds to specific,
Yeah, from TID 1, really out of TID 1
okay.
into now these are actual, in the past CDA didn't really have quote-unquote CDA funds. We now have these CD funds, and that's why we're starting to, Mark puts together financial reports so we can, fulfill our fiduciary responsibilities with respect to these funds. So,
Mark, there's also funds from TIF plans. I mean, this is just the 880 and then the balance of the loan and the facade grants, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Not that I want to spend any money, but I'm just saying there's also open TIFs that used to fund CDA's activities, correct?
Well, again, historically, TIF 1 was this behemoth of a TID district.
Yeah.
And everything that the CDA recommended to the board was just paid for by TID 1. So,
Yeah.
And now the expenditures, but
so now that district's spending period is closed and the remaining districts are much more constrained, the inception of this transfer from TID 1 was to give the CDA some flexibility to still carry on some of those activities, at least for the next 8 to 10 years. At least that's how it was, at inception was, and then we'll see how things happen over the next 4 to 5 years from now.
so this restricted for CDA activities, is that part of the 880?
Yes.
yes.
And that covers the administrative costs, the financial fees, survey studies, plans. There's a whole contemplated list of things that the CDA was envisioned to potentially engage in over time. So that's kind of how we arrived at that. But as far as what it's used for, it's really just a third bucket, and how the CDA actually spends those funds is not necessarily constrained by the hypothetical budget numbers, but those budget numbers reflect how that number was built up over time.
Thank you.
And to that was President Rozak, correct? Still speaking?
Yes.
So, sorry.
No, it's hard. I have
that's
joined
a
the
good
room.
point that there are small balances, Mark, correct, or small budgeted numbers in the other TID districts for CDA-related activities, right?
Yes.
Well, there
On it.
are funds in the TID districts for services and activities the CDA could propose to the board, yes.
Yep, okay, all right. So that's a good point, to keep track of those as well. Okay, any other questions on the financial report?
So, quick question, and I mean, I guess, and this is just me wanting to know. So, if there are funds in other TID districts that the CDA can propose to the board, I mean, it isn't captured in here. Is it more? How do we track that? I mean, it seems pretty nebulous to me.
Mhm. Well, I mean, the board and the village has quarterly financial reports, annual budgets that show fund balances and various things. It's again, the TIDs and the nature of the underlying TID project plans have a lot more flexibility than what would be a typical departmental budget. So I think the real takeaway would be if the CDA has something they'd like to propose, that they get it on the table and then, advance it to the board, and the board will.
So for instance, because TID 1 was so open, we could use it for anything in the business district, so it's like just a bank account. But since that expenditure is closed, TID 3 though is also multi-property, it's bigger than just the metro market board. So that has always been, we just approved something at the village board using TID 3 for the money.
Yeah, TID 3 is down by the river.
Yeah.
And that was for the management plan of that bluff trail in TID 3.
Right. So I had suggested using TID 5 for the study.
Yeah.
For transportation study, and I think you said no, we couldn't do it, but.
Well, I said we'd have to determine what the applicable amount relative to the TID 5 project plan would be for that.
And so there's other funds in open TIFs,
Okay,
as long as you can cover it with the revenue by the end date.
okay, got it.
And one of the questions, I just wanted the President Rose could kind of mention to me when we were in the room earlier, while the meeting was going on, was why wasn't there a vote placed on the parking and transportation study dollar amount? And my recollection from that, within the meeting minutes that you just recently approved, and my recollection from that was that there was discussion here at the meeting and that the group had said, let's see what comes back. The CDA had requested in the RFP that we kind of call out specific areas for dollar amounts, because the CDA wanted, there seemed in the room like there was, that there was desire to proceed with the study, but people wanted to see what the dollar amounts were coming in at before making a final decision of what the CDA was going to contribute to the study. Is that a fair synopsis? That's
Yeah,
where
we hadn't seen any quotes.
Right, so and just to give you a quick update on that, they came back in on, the RFPs came in on Friday, so we'll be moving forward to do that review, so you can anticipate seeing that later.
That was my recollection, is that we wanted to see the actual bids
Right,
to know what we were approving things for.
yeah.
So I have a question, Rebecca, and it's on this, I was gonna ask it later on the agenda, but, it doesn't look like it's coming back to CDA. We're gonna put it on a future agenda, correct? And the reason I say that is, they're an active partner, they're a funding partner.
Right.
So,
Right.
they should see it before the village board does. I mean, usually you
I
recommend.
can't recall off the
or-
top of my head. I can grab the work plan to
I
see.
just remember, it doesn't sound like it from the write-up.
Initially, when the work plan was drafted, there was a belief that the CDA would weigh in before, but I guess it is correct since they did not weigh in and they were holding off on it. So yeah, we did receive the bids. We're gonna be reviewing those bids within the next week and then potentially interviewing, candidates based on that. So if we needed to bring it back in March before the board decided on March 4th, we could bring it, or I need to see a calendar, I suppose, but I guess if that was the desire or need.
Yeah, March 1st would be the next meeting. I'm out of town for that date, but if you want to convene.
So the only reason
Convene.
that I asked, I was under the impression from the last meeting that we had worked with this committee to draft the RFP scope. And that should, regardless of how much it comes in, the village board was asking for 30. If it comes in less, then we would, deduct it out. But I thought we had general consensus that with putting in the scope and being okay with the tasks,
I think the CDA was agreement in principle to do the study, and then, as someone else said, whatever was applicable to
you can't parse it out like that.
the specific areas, because the traffic study is bigger than the CDA's areas of responsibility, and so
Not
that's why
really.
we wanted to sort of see a line item
Yeah.
total and say, okay, these 10 line items apply to CDA-related activities.
Peter.
CDAs will reimburse for those. And so the 30, we weren't sure where the 30 was coming from or what it applied to. We needed to, in our mind, tick and tie to justify whatever participation we were going to have.
So our last conversation, that I really hope that's not what the CDA does, because we're 1 square mile, and everything that we do with traffic, whether it's in the residential area or in the business district, affects the business district. And so I I just remember there was pretty much consensus that was the case. So if we sit
I would
down,
disagree with that. I mean,
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd agree with that either.
what happens on Sheffield Avenue in front of my house does not affect any business district in the village.
well, if we change parking regulations, it will.
No, it won't. We're not anywhere near a business district.
If we start using cul-de-sac.
But I also feel like that's an extended, I mean, that argument, we could use that argument to extend CDA authority across a lot of different things, if that's the logic we're using. And I feel like that's a slippery slope for us to go down,
Okay.
to say everything in the village applies to the business district, because then,
But
I
we
don't know,
wrote
that scares
the RFP
me.
together, so when we wrote the RFP, it's based on a certain dollar amount. And so the question is, when you reviewed that RFP as a committee, did you feel comfortable with the scope pertaining to the business district? Because the scope's not changing. It's not changing at all.
My understanding, and this is just my understanding from listening, my understanding was that people were, in general, everyone, correct me if I'm wrong, okay, 'cause this is also memory.
This
Always
is
in the
3 months-
early mornings.
This is 3 months ago.
That everyone appeared to be comfortable with the scope, but there was never a
number.
consensus or a motion on a number
Yeah.
of contribution.
Right.
Yeah, I
But
think
the
authority
CDA 's
I was,
oh,
I'm sorry, finish.
No, and the CDA has always been aware that the board has requested 30,000, but they wanted an opportunity to review it prior to making a final determination.
I get that.
Yeah, I mean, the
Scope is the
30,000
same.
seemed to
Right.
me
You can do that
to
today
be
without numbers.
basically
So
a
these apply to
funding
CDA.
gap that the village had, was asking the CDA to fill that gap. And I guess, as I recall, we felt like there needed to be more logic to that to our participation in the overall large village-wide study specific to CDA responsibilities.
Right.
And so a line item would show us what those components were, and then we would, provide funding for those components.
But you have
That's
that.
us.
You've had that. That's what the scope of services is. And so you.
Yeah, but there were no dollars, when we looked at it and talked about it,
Right.
we weren't seeing any dollars associated with those components.
But you could
So
pick
the
out.
scope, the village defined the scope.
Right. I'm just saying.
We were willing to,
You don't need to
Go
wait, because you can just go through the scope today and say, these are the things that I think apply to us, and then when the dollar amount comes, we fill it in.
I think this is a great discussion, and I'm just, from a procedural standpoint, I'm just gonna hover back because this is what I do. So, what I'm taking away from this discussion is that friendly reminder that we're gonna take a look at meeting dates to make sure that this comes back before the committee within the time plan or the work plan, because those are fluid, so I think that it was my understanding or impression that it was gonna come back to this group, prior to moving forward, so we'll take a look at the timeline and see how that's accommodated for. Bart, is there anyone from the CDA who's on the review group?
Not specifically, I mean, trustee Warren is leading us.
Oh, right, you're on both,
yeah,
okay,
it should
that's
be
right.
both.
I'd like to be there, just so you know.
But I haven't seen any meetings pop up, I don't know if that's
No.
Correct, I
Because
was
they
gonna
haven't
send them
yet.
out today, I was gonna
They
make a
haven't.
matrix of the review and everything and get that out today for this weekend, so. Yeah, that's coming out today, we got the bids in, and I was just gonna distribute it that way.
Yeah, I saw the packet.
So we'll
I
look
would
for-
say one thing, do we wanna, is this something we should agendize for next CDA? I mean, I wanna make sure we keep this moving.
Correct.
So, I'd like it kind of on the agenda for the next one.
Do
because-
we
Yep,
need a
that would-
special meeting? Because when does it go to the board?
I think for purposes of right now, let us take a look at that administrative detail and get back to you. I just don't wanna waste your meeting time talking through dates.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay,
Yeah, that'd be good.
All
alright,
right.
so let's finish the
Thank you.
quarter four report.
any other questions on the financials? Okay, and this doesn't require any action on it, right? This is our
No, it's just,
plan.
correct.
Yep, okay.
Thank
Okay,
you.
next item 4.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
You bet, have a great day.
The RFP for financial advisory services. Thank you, staff, for the details here. As CDA can see, it's my belief that, I think it makes sense to participate in this process. We do need to, I believe, we need to make our own determination as to the outcome of that RFP. I think we could follow village board lead, whatever they decide, but I don't think that's our only path. I think we need to make sure we're using the correct financial advisory services firm for our needs. But it makes sense to me to put it up, to participate in the RFP. I think it's always good to see what's out in the marketplace, what firms are doing, are we getting the best services for the best price? So it seems logical to me to participate. I don't know if anybody has any comments on that.
I have a question. Two things. Did CDA adopt the purchasing policy? I think we did.
There's a separate purchasing policy for the CDA, but yes.
It follows the same.
Very similar.
Okay,
There's
so-
some minor differences, but yes.
So, and Mark, the total of the contract would be over the 10,000?
Depends on the scope of services
Correct.
you request with the financial advisor.
Right.
Okay. So either, if it's over 10,000, whether you go with the village or not, you still have to RFP. So then my other question is, you had mentioned before you didn't want to commingle funds. Like you didn't like putting them in the same investment, and so using the same financial advisor, is that what you would recommend?
Well, the financial advisor, you know, I think the comment of commingling funds had more to do with investments, not
Okay.
financial analysis. So I don't see that as being either a pro or a con. Obviously, there needs to be, if they're different, there needs to be a certain level of collaboration to make sure that the CDA isn't generating one data set and presenting that to the board, and the village's financial advisors are generating different data sets. But I think at this point, the data points are fairly apparent. So it's really then a matter of, you know, the assumptions you want to use for CDA purposes, assumptions that the board or I want to use for village purposes, and then, you know, understanding that if there's differences, that it's only because of the assumptions.
But we would be invoiced separately for our work
Correct.
in the village anyway, so.
You know, President Rosa brings up a good point. In the RFP, can we, I think it'd be important for us to know the implications. Well, I guess somewhere it'd be important for us to know the implications if we do choose a different financial advisory services firm than the village. And I'm not sure how that needs to factor into our decision,
So wait,
I think.
are you, let me, so I don't misunderstand, were you proposing or thinking that we would send out a joint RFP and then interview and pick?
We have the ability to pick a different one. We don't know if we would.
But I mean, with one RFP going out between the two of us, or is it two separate RFPs is my question, like?
I think it's one RFP
I'm
with
proposing
two
to do it in one.
line items.
Yeah, I think it's one RFP.
There'd be more than two line items,
Well,
but.
Right.
No, I mean,
two
because there's
big
several facets at the village as well that don't necessarily require, you know,
Yeah,
like bond counsel versus,
Right.
other fiscal analysis for the village. I mean, those could potentially be two separate if there was some advantageous response that merited that.
So you would do one RFP, get responses back, have a selection committee, you may, and then out of that pool, you might choose a different one? Is that what we're saying?
That's a possibility.
Okay,
It wouldn't be one that I would advise.
okay.
However, it is a possibility, given the statutory differences. So I guess that's, you know, and,
Write that RFP.
like working on the process and stuff, you know, Peter was like, you know, we've never done this before with the CDA as a group, you know, so much of what you do, even though the CDA has been in existence for a long time, you're kind of doing it for the first time, so we just wanted to, you know, have that as a part of the conversation before we started the process.
Rebecca, ideally, how would you see this? You said you wouldn't. That's not how you would see it working. How do you see it kind of working and playing out?
I can tell you that in most places, to do an RFP and quote the different services that the groups are looking for, and then having to come back, it makes no sense to have the same financial advisor looking at both, because ultimately,
But, so let me just ask you, have you ever, it seems to me, and I could be wrong, but it'd be easier to write the two scopes for RFPs, bid them out simultaneously, like referencing each
that's
other?
in essence, or in
Okay.
essence what happens within, you know, it's just redundant to have the same other formatting on the scope within there. You have, you know, we'll have a scope for the CDA, we'll have a scope for the village, and then it just releases under one document.
On a practical basis, though, I mean, you're doing this to make sure that you're getting competitive bids, but on a practical basis, you know, you're gonna wanna go probably with the same financial advisor, and there's an institutional history with others that are they're familiar with how we, I mean, if they're, you know, so that's kind of, you're doing this more just from a fiduciary responsibility standpoint to make sure you're getting competitive bids, as long as like LRs is within the, in the ballpark, right? Is that fair to say?
There's two reasons for a purchasing
Yeah.
policy when we adopt them. One is to get competitive bids,
Yeah.
and the other is to provide equal opportunity to all contractors.
Okay, all right, that makes
So,
sense.
I mean, if
Is
another.
that at the expense of
So-
operational efficiency, or,
It's,
like, because we don't go with just low bid, right?
no, we don't go with low bid, no, but it's just providing opportunities so you're not continually hiring your friend. And, you know, firms grow up over 5 years, and all of a sudden now they're qualified to actually respond, and they weren't 5 years ago, so
Yeah.
it really helps.
But
And
that's a
again,
good,
the purpose, go ahead, sorry, John.
well, I was gonna say, it's a good point, because if we're going into this with the idea that it truly is open to all, and we truly will make a decision based on just what's presented,
Correct.
that's in my mind, that's a slightly different process than also factoring in
Oh, I see what you're saying.
how, that someone's already worked with us for 15 years.
Well, there's a
Right,
criteria,
right.
and I would.
Like, do we, is that part of the factor or not?
Good question, so I'm going to, I just wrote it down.
Because I don't know how anyone beats that.
Well,
If the price is
yeah,
the same.
yeah,
Usually, you
You
should
know.
have a matrix of about 5 evaluation criteria,
Yeah.
one of which is experience with Shorewood, experience, you know, so you get points for that.
Oh, okay, so that is a
But
factor.
Yeah.
I need to work with Rebecca and the board to come up with, for ourselves, that we have not, we just adopted purchasing policy, next step is to do that evaluation.
Right, yeah, cause
And
I
I
just
think
did, I just
everybody
did this with my
has to do
insurance
it.
agent, like, do I really wanna switch? Cause he just knows everything.
But that's the
You know,
If
nature
you're
of
minority,
this.
you might get points with that one, so
Yeah,
there's all
right.
different ways to gain points.
Yeah,
So again, my main point for discussing this was, again, I don't think we can just default to what the village is gonna do. I believe the CDA has an obligation to make its own determination. And if that determination is to stay with the same advisor that the village chooses, I think we have to make a decision. We can't just defer, in my mind.
yeah. I
So
agree.
that's why, okay, all right.
So can,
That's the clarification point I want to have in this discussion.
yep, that's great. Can we just have a motion solidifying?
Yep.
And what I'm hearing that maybe included in that motion is that you're comfortable moving forward within the scope of the RFP process that we're gonna prepare. We're gonna bring one back to you for your review and approval prior to being sent, and that at the end of the day, the CDA will be exercising that decision on the financial advisor. Is that what I heard?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I
No.
was looking at blank faces, so.
So I will officially
No, John already
say,
did.
oh, did you, okay. John,
John,
And I already
I could never
seconded.
repeat what was
no,
proposed, but I
just
did say
reference
so.
what she said.
Yeah.
Yes, that was.
Is that what I heard? I mean, I'm repeating it also for myself for understanding. Okay,
that's
because
what-
I try to watch all your faces as we go through
Yeah,
the discussion, but
That
I
was
just,
a good summary.
okay.
Okay, so everybody's clear on the motion? And I believe we have a motion and a second, is that correct?
Yes.
John was the first, who was the second?
Mike
Mike.
was, Mike was the second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Next item is the community survey, 2019 community survey. The 2016 survey was included. Rebecca, I don't know, do you have any initial comments on this?
No, other than, we have been providing it to all of the committees in the village to see if they have any suggestions or things that they would like to have included. Any suggestions that are developed here actually will be going to the board on Monday for to the SAC committee for their review. So,
so in the past.
Okay, I mean, obviously, it's a very extensive survey, I would say, so I think we need to be careful about adding a lot of stuff.
Well, can I just let you know the history, because I had to get it from Tyler last time, 3 years ago, when I first came on. The purpose of the survey is to not change it. unless
Yeah.
absolutely necessary, because
Okay.
we compare over time. So if there's something majorly, pertinent that isn't in there, that it's okay to add something, but it's not, please don't look at it and be like, let's change these, because they have to stay pretty much
Good point.
similar.
Good point.
Yeah, we
That's a really good
it's
point,
over
okay.
time.
My one question actually was, looking at the elected officials on the CDA, are there any CDA-related items, development, housing, economic vitality, that kind of stuff that you are hearing from citizens that is not, to President Rozek's point, any pressing issues that you're hearing that are not included in here already? There's not a lot of in here on sort of housing affordability or
That was gonna be,
transition house.
Peter, that was gonna be one of my suggestions, is, I know it's been discussed in the past that and I think we probably do need some sort of study to determine our housing stock affordability versus not affordability, and a lot of it is just anecdotal. But having a question, and this is totally off the top of my head, but some sort of question of, if you are a renter, for example, maybe it's a two-part question: how many bedrooms are in your rental, and what do you pay for rent? Like, that would be a way to collect. Now, it's not very verifiable, of course, but it's just one way to collect information. Probably the same way that people are gonna collect information if we hired UWM to do a study. I mean, I don't think everyone's gonna review official leases. So, you could just ask a question, an additional question, not change a question, but add a question trying to determine what people pay for rent for certain, just keep it really simple. 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, not get into the nuance of how nice the 2 bedroom is, or, that's gonna be hard to do, but just some sort of baseline.
If we were gonna do that, I would suggest, instead of having them list out what they pay for rent, like put it in buckets.
Or, yeah,
Like,
right.
1 to 500, 500 to 1,000.
Yep.
Like, well, and
But
maybe it's like
what's the point of that, though?
Right.
Only because we're only gonna get back, usually, I think it's like less than 1,000 responses, I don't remember what it was, Rebecca. And affordability, we did discuss it at the board last year, and for some reason, the board was told not to make a big deal about affordability, but regardless, I have a hard time, it already asks if you're a renter, so rather, if you are gonna add something about that, I wouldn't say if you're a renter. People get really, they feel segregated, and why are you at, so anyways, you can tell, because it already says rent, so you could just say, what do you pay in your monthly household?
Sure, yeah,
Right?
yeah, you can
Because
phrase
then you
it
can
that
figure
way.
it
That
out.
was sort of my thought, was that on that question of do you rent or own the home, could it be like a sub-question of that? If you do rent, what is your rental?
Yeah, it doesn't even necessarily, depending on how exportable this data is, it doesn't have to be a sub-question, because you could just resort the data based on renters versus non-renters, and then look at household expenditure or something, so. I just thought it would be a way to start gathering it, because my understanding is the village does not gather that information at all, anyway,
But
anyhow.
US Census does, correct? I mean, that is data that we can get,
Correct.
I
The
mean,
American
it's
Community
way
Survey would
more-
have a lot of that information.
which we just bought, right, for 500?
Sorry.
That's available online free at any time.
I just wanted, because we
The
should,
American
when we do
Community
houses, I
Survey
think we
aspect of the
that.
census will have affordability, or will have rental and, bedroom and rates and things like that will be in there. And that's a little more scientific within the margin of error.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but, the only reason, I believe, a major reason why we're even having this discussion right now is because, how would I phrase this?
Carefully.
People have made comments that Shorewood is not affordable, and that's the concern, is
For
that
everyone, not affordable for everyone, correct, that's what I.
there's not
would
enough
suggest.
affordable
Yes.
housing
Yeah.
options, or maybe that's a better way, is that? Am I saying that sort of right?
No, because no.
Okay.
A lot of people think there's older stock housing that is affordable, that's why we have 52%.
Well, I believe that, right? I'm just saying the reason why the CDA, this was on our list of things to consider, doing a housing affordability study, or doing a housing
Right.
study.
Can I interject just to give an update? So from a work planning perspective, in May, we're slated to go back and review, remember we froze the neighborhood loan program? We're slated to go back and take a look at that and work with the CDA in that, and then also have that next step of the discussion of, should we move forward with some type of a market on affordability, kind of get our arms around specifically what that scope would look like, and then make some determination there. So just so you know, we're scheduled to have that
June, right?
discussion.
June?
Yeah, it's like, it spans over a course of 3 or 4 months. So just know that from our perspective on work planning, we intend to reconnect with you on that.
And
Sorry.
I would, while we're thinking about it, I would incorporate what is our market, because there's a lot of talk about vacancies, and it would be great to know, have we saturated our market? Do we need to bring in office development? Like, just the basics on commercial would be very helpful as well.
As it relates to housing?
No, just a market study for housing and
Oh, just two
just
separate?
Yeah,
okay.
parts of that study. It would really
So
help.
again, for purposes of this discussion, so I think are we making again, there's no action really here. I think we're proposing to the village, maybe reviewing the potential for some sort of question around rent versus own, or did we decide that there's better data
We
that we
have
can get
rent,
someplace else?
we have rent versus own already in there. I think
Right.
my suggestion was, my question was, should we also have, in addition to household income, for example, ask a housing expenditure question, a rent, mortgage, however we wanna phrase it. I'm not proposing any specific language, just the idea that should there be something.
And then trustee Warren had mentioned if we do that, providing some buckets so they could just check
Yeah,
something.
if we ask people to fill in, I don't think anyone's.
Yeah, right.
Right.
No, yeah, that, cause it's a multiple choice, so it'd have to, someone would have to figure out the right
Yeah.
buckets.
I don't know if this is relevant at all, but in that, just a clarification would also be, like, is there parking included in that?
Well, that's why I said you could go down a million rabbit holes trying
Yeah.
to define,
Utilities and
it's,
We
Okay,
added parking, didn't we, or is this last year?
okay,
it wouldn't, yeah. I think my feeling is, it's just a data point, not to be the end-all be-all data point, just something, because the village doesn't have anything yet.
No.
It sounds like maybe we have some data, but I don't know what that data actually is or shows, the census type data. That'd be interesting, I'd like to see it.
When we do the market
Well,
study,
and
pull down.
what's the process? Sorry.
Go ahead, Peter.
Is the process, so obviously the village is taking feedback from all the various committees on the survey to possibly incorporate any changes, is that correct? Is
correct.
that the way this is working? Okay.
I would
So I
caution.
guess the question is, I don't know that we have an actual recommendation to add or change anything. John's proposing something to add, I guess what do other members think about that?
I'm okay with it. I would just caution against, I wouldn't expand it into things like mortgages. I think there's too many variables there in terms of, years. People, a lot of times mortgages are bundled up with property taxes. I think people give us the wrong number. So I would limit it to what you're paying for rental. And I think if we get, I would just say, the number that you're paying per month, because I think if we start to get into, do you pay utilities, do you pay parking, then it gets very complicated very quickly. So I would focus it on what you're paying total for your rental and bucket it into 4 categories, 4 or 5 categories if we do it.
Okay.
I think.
Melinda, I'm sorry, to circle back to and I'm sorry, I think I keep talking over people, I'm sorry, I can't hear. Mike, is there a better source for that data? Does the census have better data on that we could go and look at that instead?
They do, and I think during the market study, the first thing they're gonna do is pull the data.
Is this
So
census
maybe
from
we have a better source for that.
from 2010 though?
Yeah, that's,
I mean, that's.
But the American Community Survey does estimates along the way. So they're 5-year estimates that would continually be republished. So you'd be looking at a compilation of, 2017 to 2012. It's
Okay,
there's,
so it's wrong.
When's the survey going out? Or what's the game plan? When do you want to get all your feedback back from the committee so you can proceed?
The board's reviewing it on Monday, so
Oh,
today.
And just,
So I'm not sure.
oh,
Go
so I did have some, I'll say not the board, but just so you guys are aware, parking questions, these aren't quite, these might be from last year, but since we're doing a parking study, just if I was just as a CDA member, it's gonna be really important to get feedback on in business district. Maybe you're thinking of meters, maybe you're, so if there's anything specific, parking would be my biggest one to add question. I'm going to at the board, but
So, what was the consensus of this group?
I don't know, because I think, if we're gonna get into housing at some point, we are going to get into housing, and so we will be looking at lots of studies and whatever data we can, and to add, one more piece to this study doesn't make much sense to me. But I do agree that since the parking study is about to be launched, that would be the one place where you could get even additional information if you beefed up the parking there.
Can I just add, just for my history with the village? Hi Peter, it's Erica. That,
Hey, Erica.
The planning department, the assessor, they have every parcel with how many units, how many bedrooms per unit. I know I was gathering rents as the planner and working with the senior resource center, that they were trying to figure out the amenities so they could have this list for people that, do they have elevators? So they've been working as time permits to gather that information too. If you really wanna get.
That's in a database somewhere?
Yeah, so if you
It's an
wanna
Excel
find out
spreadsheet.
what the average rent is, you could easily do a randomized survey out to, because the list exists
Yeah,
today.
that's
You know,
really
so
great.
just, yeah. And I would not put it on the survey.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What I'm hearing then is that we can get this information from a lot of different places, and we don't necessarily need to add it to the survey, and moreover, we try not to change the survey. Is that kind of?
it
Right.
is. I do think there is benefit of adding a housing question more. We brought this up last year, or 3 years ago. I can't remember why the board said no, but something about affordability, like your perception of I know that's really hard, but
That's really hard.
yeah, I think that's why we decided not to, but something about housing, like,
So
do you
subjective.
feel we need more households in the range of, the same, this rent, I don't know, but I feel like we should every 3 years start talking about housing. I don't know what the question is.
I would agree with that after we have a study. Because I think it sounds like we've got access to a lot of data where actually getting a study pulled together might not be that hard. Someone just needs to do it. And then we kind of know what we're dealing with, and we could present that in maybe a housing survey or something, and we could present people with information to provide some sort of context of what that means, right? Officially, what does affordability mean? Because there is an official definition.
I was just thinking perception,
Government.
because a lot of this in the
Right.
survey is perception, because you
Yeah.
can pull one
Perception,
together,
right.
and then you'd have both.
Yeah, yeah. Well then, I guess what I'm hearing is we're not adding anything as a committee.
That's what I'm hearing, yeah.
Because, I don't, do we?
Thank
do
you,
we-
thank you, Ben.
She's like, alrighty.
I was just about to bring, but everyone likes to be ahead. I mean, it's a community survey, we wanna have a good understanding, so thank you for having that discussion.
Okay,
All right,
Next up,
well done, well done, well done.
well, no, good no action.
I'll take it
All right.
to
Item 6, Bart, I don't know if you want to go through
Yeah, I was gonna say-
your summary. Sorry, just getting there.
Yeah, I can lead this, and if you want to jump in, Peter, because I know there were several things that both you and Rebecca, and President Rose, I believe, had met with me on. So if you have anything to add on those items, feel free to let me know.
Okay.
Generally, in December, we met with Jeff Brown of General Capital to discuss the remaining vacancy in the Mosaic building. I did attach, if the CDA wasn't familiar or aware of it, the marketing standards of who the village is looking for in terms of renting that space. And he just met with us to, give us an update on where they were at and to let us know the difficulty they've been having in perhaps getting someone in that range and whether or not the CDA or village was ever willing to, revisit that. So I just attached it here. At this point, I've heard direction in no other, way, but it was just a touch point for him to let us know where they were at and what the current standards were.
I have a question. So I read all of that, but there were what was the next step? And the only reason I ask is, if the board was willing to change, yes, we would like to amend the developer's agreement attachment so that we could have parking all day for employees. We could rent them out during the day for employees to like Casa Day, whatever. What is the next step? Do we survey the businesses? Like, would we partner with the bid and say, hey, would you rent these spaces during the day for employees? Like, somehow we have to know our demand.
So that's a different item for us, just to be clear on what this one was about.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so the parking study, the next step, perhaps Rebecca could weigh in on that, but this one is just on the remaining commercial vacancy, and he just wanted to let us know, the preferred tenant categories, and if he found someone who wasn't within that category, what the process would be, to bring it to the CDA for consideration, things like that. So it was kind of just a speed thing, and perhaps Erica's got more information on it.
No, I
Or
just wanted
background?
to add that I meet with Jeff Brown periodically as well, and he reminds me each conversation that they have an agreement with Kroger's that they can't add any more food to
Right.
the Mosaic building. So, and any food or, there's other restrictions, so that would be good to have that
Food
information.
meeting restaurant?
Yeah, or
Any-
just any food, any liquor, anything that would compete directly with Metro Market,
Okay.
so.
Like Goody Gourmet? I mean, anything that
No,
would compete
they
with
sell
Metro Market.
popcorn, so
I mean, that's what I'm
right.
saying. So, when I've talked to Michael Weiss, directly, he has a really hard time renting this space. There's no garbage, like there's no back door. It's a tiny, tiny sliver and there's no back door.
Mhm.
And so it's gonna be real tricky. You have to take your garbage out the front, go around. I mean, it's not a conducive site. It was like
Yeah,
it's not configured. Just so you know of why it may be taking longer to find someone.
So this is one of the middle, I can't even picture which one this
Yeah,
is.
this is right in the middle.
Is it next to the dog food or the
Yeah,
pet place?
yeah, I think it's next to the eye.
The Wisconsin Vision.
Yes.
So like they wanted
Between
doors
the
there,
pet
and-
place and the eye place, is that how it is?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's tiny, it's very tiny.
But again, the discussion was what the process would be if they found something that didn't fit into what's in the agreement currently, right, Bart?
Correct, because it is a long-standing vacancy, and I think everyone would like to see it filled, but, so he was just kind of giving us his perspective on the difficulty it's been. And,
Yep.
if they were to find a tenant, he didn't suggest that they had one to present to us or anything, but he was just saying if they found one, this is his understanding of how it would be, and
Yeah,
Doesn't the
there is a
process go to the
process,
village
yeah.
manager? Doesn't it go to the village manager?
yes,
First.
it is outlined it here, I believe, on, within here.
Well, I don't see any downside to them bringing anything
Yeah.
and everything.
Right.
I mean, why wouldn't they? Are they
It's
just
not gonna be
afraid
like
to waste our
food, you
time,
need
or
access to
what's their
garbage.
concern?
I don't think there's a concern per se. I think he's just reaching out to let us know it's difficult to find someone, and he doesn't want to fill it with the first person that walks off the street either. He wants it
So
to
your concern.
complement the other uses and support the village activities.
The
But
concern was that the past village manager said no to two of the tenants that he wanted to bring forward. So, so would they want, so.
But it's just an ask. I mean, I don't understand what.
I'm
the
just
big
saying
deal
that they're
is.
probably just worried,
You
like,
could bring
now
us
there's a
15 things, we
new-
keep
you
saying no,
can't-
but, okay. I mean, I don't know.
Our conversation looks like, or it sounded to me as if we were getting some information, he was sharing for us what the concerns were. But he also focused a lot on him finding the right tenant that was financially viable. So, I left with the impression that he's not gonna come in with anything that he doesn't feel is gonna be financially suitable for them, and then we'll take a look at it when it does. But
Yeah.
thanks for letting me know that there's past baggage with
Yes.
design approval, I don't know. I was just gonna.
The past village manager wanted a, sit-down restaurant, so the biggest space, I think the Mosaic's in there now, but.
Well, that's a tough space to.
Not in
just-
that,
I'm
not in
just
that
saying
space, he
Yeah,
wasn't
that's
asking
why it
for.
was
I just
denied.
think that they
It
wanted
wasn't
some
interested.
control over how they assorted that.
Yeah.
And, that was early on in the process, just and now, you know,
Okay.
you've had this vacancy for a while, and
Yeah.
I imagine if it was a reasonable tenant,
It's
we'd be
nice, yeah.
we'd be flexible on it, or the village, the process would be flexible.
Frozen yogurt.
That's what I'm rooting for.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't compete with Metro, so I don't
Yeah,
think we
you
do
can.
that.
it really was just kind of a,
Yeah.
discussion. There wasn't, in my mind, there wasn't a real ask with it. It was more of a touch point, and Erica meets them regularly, it sounds like, as well, so he was just, probably going through the system on that.
I have to
You wanna go to
ask,
item B?
I just wanna ask a quick question. There's no back door, is that within code? Is that, you can do that?
There might not be a back door to like outside, but it might go to a common hallway. I don't know.
I was just kidding.
Yeah.
I
Just
didn't
kidding.
look at the floor
Yeah,
plan, but I'm
right,
sure,
exit.
yeah.
Just want to exit out the.
So yeah, that's,
Okay.
that's item B. Item B is, just, Rebecca and I met briefly at the end of December with, the Legion Post. The building is up for sale now, so we were just kind of asking some questions to get a base of, who to send things to and if we got questions asked to us, et cetera. So it was kind of just an introduction that it was gonna be for sale.
I heard they sent out an RFP. Did they advise?
I never saw or reviewed
Yeah,
anything.
They never shared it that with
And,
us.
and this I've gotten questions from some CDA members about, is there any role the CDA may or could play in this? This is I think a key parcel in the village, and so I don't know that I don't think it's for this meeting, but if we want to agenda something just to, again, does the market just be the market and whatever happens, or, again, I'm not sure where we fall on this, but it's a key parcel in the village, and if it's going to be sold and what's going to happen to it, and do we want to participate in any way?
You're talking about the American Legion Post?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and my understanding is that as a CDA, we officially would not get involved unless someone came asking for public assistance.
You
Correct.
could, in the
Typically,
past
yeah.
they have.
No, I know, but so if they didn't, if someone just came and built something by right, then no one has a
Correct.
say in anything.
Correct, but in the past, before my time, you can incentivize, you could say, hey, we're gonna fund this parcel if
Yeah, we
you
really
will
want to
do
see this there, and
So
we'll
it's
do
like
that,
a
yeah.
village initiative, so two types of TIFs. Anyways, I prefer your theory.
I do
But
too,
there
I mean, I
is
think it seems
another
like
way to do it.
but, yeah. Okay,
So yeah, I'm sure you've probably seen or heard and asked about it, but so it is for sale. So that's where we're at. I've received no serious inquiries from anyone necessarily on plans for it. So it's new to the market. We'll see where that goes. Another one to the market, which we discussed. Sure.
We'll know.
Wait,
We'll note
we
it.
have to.
8:35, Florsheim
Yep.
departed the meeting.
So we met with General. Go.
Can I just on the item C, again, I've had a couple questions from CDA members about sort of these types of meetings, and I guess I want to open it up to the CDA. Oftentimes, someone wants to, just have a meeting to understand what's going on. They don't want it to be a big deal. They're just trying to learn information quietly, I guess. And so oftentimes they'll reach out to staff to have those discussions. And, in this case, staff asked President Rozak to be there. So this is kind of the way the process has worked in the past as people are doing their investigation. We always bring them, any discussions we've had, back to the CDA to tell the CDA what's going on. As Bart is doing right here, but I've had others say, can I participate, or why isn't this to the full CDA? And I guess I don't think we get the information we want to. I don't think people would do it if it was right away a big public discussion. I think they're fact-finding, investigating before it gets to that. So I think this is a good process. I think it helps us learn information, making it easier for someone like a Michael Weiss to ask some questions to see maybe where things are. But I want to be respectful of some of the questions I got from CDA members about kind of why does it happen this way. And again, my point is this is not, there's nothing that ends up being hidden or the CDA isn't aware of. And you might not be in that meeting, but we will always bring it to you to tell you what the discussion was, kind of what happened. So
Peter?
I guess, yeah.
So I just wanted to, I know we've had some conversations about this, or at least I have with Rebecca. This is every municipality I've ever worked in. So if a developer wants to tell you what the performer looks like, or they always meet with staff. And then once they want to submit or have a request, then it comes to the full, that would come to the CDA. So you get updates. The only thing that worried me about this one was we did meet with First North Shore Bank, sent a representative. They hired a consultant to do the RFP for the site. We met one time with them, and I know, Rebecca, you guys have included it in your updates, and it was like a 3-minute conversation that was awkward because it was like, well, we're the seller, how much are you going to put into the deal that makes their land price go up? So as long as they knew we were a willing partner, yeah. So at that meeting, I was sitting there and I just said, well, I don't personally, I want to sell votes, but I don't, see us putting money into the deal. So then they set their land price. That's how it always goes. And then once the RFPs came back, the developer wanted to meet and ask the same question: how much will you give me? So I do feel uncomfortable with not coming and saying, how does the CDA feel about that? Rather than just an update, I think when they come, like especially for this parcel, I would like to know what the CDA's input is and desire, because if everyone on this committee said we're open to funding $2 million, I would love to know that, because then that's ultimately what we convey back. It shouldn't be one person.
Yeah.
Anyways, we could go over the details of what was discussed.
Yeah, I think that to me is, a reasonable sort of place to have that conversation and then come back to the CDA and have a sort of a recap of what was discussed. But I do think that there needs to be, we've talked about that even at the board level, is just some kind of baseline understanding of what do people think. I know what I think, but I don't know what everybody else thinks. And so then as these, sort of one-off conversations come up, that we can give that developer, whoever it may be, sort of a realistic expectation of, before you walk into the room, like, this is sort of what people think.
Well, I know, speaking for myself personally, I've always been interested in this, because I know there's a history with TIFs and TIDs, and there's positives, there's negatives, there's debate, strong debate on both sides. I don't claim to know much about the economics of why these are needed versus wanted versus nice to have. And I definitely don't want to get into that discussion.
No,
I'm just saying I do think though, for me, and it would be nice to have some understanding. I think I asked this of Bart maybe a long time ago or someone, why do developers feel like they need $1 million, $2 million, $5 million?
They run the numbers.
And, well, but they run the numbers based on a purchase price, right? So so here's my scenario, I'll just throw it out there. So whether it's this parcel or another one, if they feel like they need, because we're telling them they have to have a certain number of parking spaces per whatever, and they have to be underground, and they say, oh, well, that's gonna cost $1.5 million. Well, then, if the village isn't gonna participate, then to me, that makes the value of the land $1.5 million less.
Okay, so.
Versus keep the price of the land the same, and find someone else to give $1 million.
If you're
So
building
there's
a-
like a philosophy question there, I guess.
There's also, they have to build parking. I mean, you can't rent an apartment. If you sat through the conversation, I'd love to recap it for you, but Michael Weiss's perspective is, it was like $1.5 million short, right? When he ran the numbers. And he even emailed afterwards and just said, the land prices, they're asking way too much for that land. Like, so, it doesn't have anything to do with parking, because they're gonna build their parking, they have to build their parking, or they're not gonna get tenants. He already had that all factored in, there's no requirement, that was impeding it. It was, and that's
Well,
what
right,
he
but
put around the
then, is the
whole-
land price set because people assume people are gonna get money?
Yes.
Or is
all
the
around
land
country.
price set because that's just what they have to get, otherwise they're gonna let it sit there for 15 years doing nothing?
So that was my point.
So if we
This
could
conversation.
table this, I think this
Yeah.
is a good discussion. I think this is a discussion we should agenda and talk about. And I think Trustee Carpenter's point is well taken as I'm thinking about this. Maybe, because again, these meetings I think are gonna keep happening, and to me is what's the right process.
Right.
But
That was my point of bringing it up. I think, for me personally, I think other people on the CDA, and I don't know if it's a special, just, not even a meeting, just a education session on how this works and why this even is an issue. And that to me,
Well, I think also-
and I'm happy to
I think
read
we can
something,
also-
so I've got a book I want to send me.
I do.
But I think,
I have
I think
bags
the other
of wine
point,
from
the other point is,
Wisconsin.
again, to Trustee Carpenter's point, maybe part of the conversation we have is you providing direction to me about when these inquiries happen. How do I, put some parameters around how I can respond to them. And maybe my response is, that's an interesting proposal, because again, this wasn't even a proposal, it was really just kind of a question and fact finding. So, but maybe it's, it's certain requests, and then I can say, I need to take that back to the CDA to discuss and see how to respond. Or, the CDA has determined that with respect to any possible TIF financing, it really needs to meet these criteria. It really needs to meet the, the facts and circumstances of, the but-for test. So maybe I can get some more guidance from you so that when I'm in meetings, I'm not just speaking for myself, but I am speaking for my understanding of the CDA's position with respect to this. And again, we would never commit to anything in those meetings,
That would be
ever.
a policy. So my question was, are we supposed to be briefing you on this meeting? Because it's on here, it's on the agenda, do you wanna know the details so that we can get some feedback? Because as they left, he did propose, he was one of the RFP proposers, and he came in and showed us he had a gap. So, Peter, you were there, and none of us seemed interested in funding. We said, thank you very much. But again, we probably should, at some point, talk about that.
I think it needs to be an agenda item that we have discussed. I think a recap of the meeting is perfectly acceptable at this point, but I think that it needs to be an agenda item to discuss sort of what is the sentiment of the CDA, and that gives, as these meetings come up, to Peter's point, that there's some direction and some, consistency of at least before then it comes to the full CDA.
Are you talking like a
Yep,
policy?
yep.
Yeah, I agree
I
with
mean,
that.
we've been talking about policy for 3 years since I was on CDA, we need a TIF policy. Because other than that, every situation is unique, like,
Sure.
because you can do,
Well,
like I
that
said,
was
there's
our
some that
number
are
one, Rick.
there's some that are developer initiated,
Mhm.
and that's when they come to you, and then there's some where it's village initiated, like when we did the Bluff and we did Capitol Drive, and so there's just 2 different types.
Mhm.
Yep, okay.
So can we hear, so what I'm hearing is, we can recap the meeting here, but we don't wanna get into the policy kind of going forward until it's agendized for the next meeting.
Yeah, right.
And we're gonna have some housekeeping items of other things we're gonna need to get to before we get to that further discussion. I'm just like looking at your next agenda, we have some RFPs, we got some financial stuff to do, so we'll take a look to see how we can incorporate that in so that it's
Do you
reasonable.
want a quick recap of the meeting? Okay. You want me to do it?
Sure,
Okay. fill in. So the bank hired a consultant, we met with him. His intention of the meeting was, how much would you put into this property, basically, and then, but as you know, in negotiations, it's to set their land price. So we said nothing, we just said, thanks for the information, I don't, so then
You said you weren't interested in putting anything in.
I did, from the board, from one member of the board, and I phrased it exactly like that, I am one of 7.
Yeah, I think the communication was generally that there is not any tit for tit, just out of the gates looking at it.
Right,
There's
like
no
there's
reason,
no-
there's no
nobody's
reason for us to
identified.
participate.
There-
Yeah.
nobody-
I think,
not
I think
identified.
that was the clear message to them.
As a proactive stance, I mean, we hadn't even seen, so is it initiated by the village? No, because there's nobody that was initiating it here. So then the next meeting was Michael Weiss wanted just to come in, he had submitted a response, and he wanted to just share with us the performa. They run a quick performa, and it looked like there was $1.5 million gap. He went over a couple things. There was, say, like apartments in commercial or whatever it may be. And in the end, I mean, there was you go over all the numbers, but in the end, I think there was general agreement that the land price is too high. And so what I had wanted to do, I remember I had asked Rebecca to put this on the agenda because the next step could be the village actually saying to North Shore Bank,
You're too high.
you're too high and we're not putting, we're gonna take a hard stance on this, like, we're not putting any money in. You need to lower your land price, or the other thing we were thinking is, if we had a market study and it was done, what we really need is some office development. So when, at the end of the talk, it was like, well, maybe rehabbing that building and bringing in a small office tenant wouldn't be the worst thing in the world because it provides that daytime population we need to sustain our businesses. But anyways, so that was the full conversation. Is there anything more?
The only other part that came up was a need for a fifth story, or
it was
an implied need for
Yeah.
a fifth story zoning.
He
would
said
allow for
6, actually, because
I mean, he would like more for
he thought it was 5. which
rental
he knows.
purposes to make the numbers work, but, so there was a discussion as to,
6.
making a 4-story development work with that land price, in his opinion, was very problematic.
But, and again, I think the communication to him was, at this point, given what we know as the village and the CDA, we see no reason to participate with TID financing. So, he's still free to, or anybody is still free to put together a proposal and an idea for that space that would involve it. I'm always willing to listen to something, but again, as we see it, facts, circumstances right now, the market needs to be the market for this property right now.
Right. We went quickly through the pro forma. He could cut out his developer's fee, defer it to the end. He ran it at year 1. When apartments, you run it usually at sale at year 20. So there was things in there that, consultant, if they were actually going to propose something to the CDA, we would want a consultant to review those numbers. But from my blush, I said, you can get this down $1.5 million right away, and he could. So, but that was at 5 stories, and he was asking for another story. So 2 things that will require would be a height waiver and some money.
Okay.
I just wanted, I think someone said it, but maybe not as firmly, that the size of the parcel does not allow for TID creation, period. So if they're asking for TIF money, I don't know if you use
Why?
TIF, because it's under 25,000 square feet. There's a limit to how big a district has to be in order to create it.
And you just wrap it around the rest of the properties.
Right.
You don't have to
Well-
just wrap it around there, we wrap it wherever we want. You know that, right?
Yeah.
I understand that, but the parcel that exists, you can't just create a district on that parcel. Can't.
Unless you include other parcels.
Yeah.
Like the
so
alley
required.
and-
Possible to get something
road.
done.
And then that's not
Yeah.
part of the discussion.
I see what you're saying.
Okay, so I think we've discussed this one. Again, I think there were some action items, particularly a follow-up discussion for CDA direction to me with respect to as these conversations happen in the future. That was the one main takeaway I heard. Is there anything else for takeaways?
Yeah, mine is, I'm looking for advice, does it make sense to meet with North Shore Bank, like, that we just reach back out to them?
I mean, I feel like we've been pretty clear that, that they're working in the market.
But we have.
We're not currently a participant, or we don't see a way that we would be participating in any way in this process.
I think what President Rozak is saying, maybe someone needs to send a letter.
Or just a
something just
call,
reiterating that,
meeting with the
like
manager,
officially,
or
Just
that,
call them broker.
Yeah,
Right,
so-
it's just to the broker, actually, it's the guy we met with.
Yeah.
Just to circle back and say, you got your RFPs back, and they came to us, so I feel like we should circle back and say, one of the submittals, came to talk to us, wanna know how things are going, it's a great personal, blah, 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 and then, we did notice that the land price is a little high.
well, I don't think that's an action item the CDA needs to take, but if you guys want to do it, do it.
Okay.
I guess who are we to tell them what the asking price should be?
The market will tell them.
Yeah, I
It
mean,
will
they're,
just take
they're,
time.
they're free to ask whatever the heck they want. I don't think we,
Yeah.
I think we
So
communicated to them our
subsidize the land
position
price.
to both any requesters that have come and to North Shore Bank and their consultant. I feel like we've given them what they need.
Yeah, I agree. At least this early in the process.
Peter, I wanted to say, I apologize, I need to ask to be excused a little early. I have a conference call at 9 at work that I can't miss, so I'll need to go in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and I need to leave shortly too because I got to get back on the road to get home. So,
I can quickly just go through the rest of my items, take any questions. They're
Thank
less,
you.
they're
Yeah.
less meaty, I think. So, in terms of Ascension, the former Sendix building, they are going through the certified survey map process. Quick update on this: it is not on the board agenda for February 4th because they have not responded to my questions with the information needed to take it to the board. So, at the very least, it's not on the 4th's agenda. It could be on the 19th if that's the next meeting, but. At this point, we just don't have the information necessary to answer, the question on that. There's a discrepancy on ownership of one of the parcels that needs to be clarified before they can be recorded. So that's just an update as to where that's at.
okay.
Secondly, or the next one, E, we did receive plans for the Casa de Corzo, the former Goldie space. My communications says they're very close to a lease on both ends, but it's not formally signed as a lease yet. So, but they are intending on moving forward.
Didn't you just write in the bids
Yeah.
newsletter that they
They
signed?
said they signed it on the 24th.
Just wanted to I just read it after our plan commission meeting.
I have to look at the date of my communication, but it could be a week old at this point. When this was made on the 25th, at that point I had not confirmed it, and I actually thought Ogden got back to me this week with it. So, at the very least, they claimed they were close. So if they finalized it without informing me, that's possible. Yeah, events updates, the RFP, we got the results back, we'll be reviewing those shortly. We also, back in December, I ordered the market reports to update the marketing documents. I'll need to work with Erica on the content of what that needs to be. It's not as easy as, just updating the numbers, because sometimes the categories have now changed. So whereas, the top 5 categories in, 2015 said this, now we've got, 3 new categories to put in there, so comparing old data is not as easy as perhaps I had hoped or thought it would be, so I just need to touch base with her on that.
What's the intent of getting the market study, or getting that information? Are you updating that blue and white and green thing, or are you just gonna
Yeah.
create something?
Yeah, the bid is
I
after to be
would
updated.
like it to put into the recruitment packet that I have, when
I
I
just-
just talk with people, because we have no current data.
Totally agree, that's
It
why.
doesn't need it being a pretty bold,
Yeah, no, that's why we got it. But I was just wondering, in there, there's always that question of like sewer rate, like how much per household does it cost in Shorewood?
You're asking me? I don't recall that in there.
Okay, well, if it is, I'd like to see that
Demographics
before it
and
goes
Yeah,
out.
that might be a different document, but for
Okay.
sure.
That would-
We discussed this briefly here, the market studies, so I researched those briefly in December just to prepare for early spring, summer utilization of that. City of Waukesha is currently doing one, their plan commission considered it this past week, so if you're looking for things to poke around with, there are examples out there. But yeah, that's later in my spring, that's a to-do list, but I did start some research on that Rebecca had forwarded me.
Good, okay.
Have we decided it's only housing? Because otherwise we could just call it a market study.
To me, there's been no decision direction on that other than just me preparing for it in terms of the neighborhood loan program.
We're gonna come back to that discussion in May and June.
And then lastly, in terms of grants and loans, the bid and village met earlier in the month, just discussed the administrative process of loan applications. There was one in the works that we just wanted to clarify, who's doing what under what timeline. So we did meet earlier this month to go over that. So if Eric has anything else to add, that somewhat wraps up what we've been.
Next week I should be getting an application for facades for Peak Wine and North Star Bistro to remove their front and courtyard windows to have more garage slash, it's not true garage, it's like more of an accordion.
Did they already get a
Opening.
grant? Have they ever gotten a facade grant before? Either them or Thief Wine, the building?
I should know this, I have to look on my spreadsheet.
I know,
Because
'cause
I
it
know
wasn't
with the
included.
development, they have the loans, but I don't know if they individually, each business received a grant, so.
I think it goes by the building within 5-year period.
Right, and they're still, even if they did, they're still eligible because of the time span.
It would have been over 5 years.
This is, they're
Yeah,
doing
that
new,
was 2010, so.
they're doing new windows, you said?
They're removing
Unless it's the
their
same owner.
front and courtyard windows and have some, so they can open. And some
Oh,
other
like replacing
improvements.
with like overhead doors kind of a thing?
Yeah, but it's not gonna be garage style, it's gonna be more accordion based, a design.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, we should have that application next week, and, they'll be investing inside, the interiors in both of the properties as an investment through the building owner. So,
So, and I just have a question about that. So if a business has a loan that they are still paying on, they can request a facade?
yeah, that's
Yeah, they're
independent.
separate.
Okay.
Yep.
And for the loan, it was over the amount, right? The request would be over the $40,000?
The loan, I'm sorry, what are you asking?
Well, that's for Hayek's, never mind. So we were talking about business loans.
Yeah, Mark Mandelson received all the documentation for the business going into the back half of the old Hayek space, and I'm assuming it went out to John Nealand. So the village just will be waiting to hear back from John to see when it can get on the CDA agenda for the request.
Why?
Oh, sorry.
So, that's a great point in the process, and maybe we can clarify at a different date, but, the request was over the amount that's allowed by the program, 40,000. It would have to come to the CDA to
Yes.
get approval. Before sending it to John Meelan, it might be a good idea just to check in with the CDA committee to see if that's something we're interested in. Otherwise, we might be wasting his time. I'm not saying, I don't know how the committee would vote or the direction they give, but.
I would not
Meelan-
recommend that process, I guess.
Okay.
Because, I mean, every applicant has the right to go beyond the amount, to ask beyond it.
So would that come to us and
They
we would,
can ask.
we would
Right.
vote on it?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
The process is such that you just don't review it until they have all their information and then it's reviewed,
Right.
from my understanding of reading them.
Mhm.
This is my first one?
But if it's like a facade grant, if you're under 25,000 or 10,000, I can't remember, 10,000 now, it's administrative, and that makes sense, you just start the paperwork. But if it's over, wouldn't you wanna, I don't know, get a feel before you engage all that time?
So the CDA, I would think, would have questions to help that, give credence to the ask, and to get that, then you'd have the underwriter to look at things if that even makes sense, so.
Got it.
Yeah, I feel like part of our discussion would be what the underwriters, the information they're providing us. We would need that to make our determination, so unless we're not wanting to do the loan program, but to me, I don't know what we get from a field discussion beforehand. I think it's one decision after all the data, we make a decision based on the data as to whether to approve or not,
Well-
or recommend approval.
When we updated that program, just so everyone that wasn't around, if we had a lot of proposals, we don't right now, so it makes sense to say, oh yeah, well, let's see all the underwriting for 100,000. But if we actually had we have a manual for administrating at one time, you'd wanna check in, because we don't have enough funding. We purposely left it at that 40,000 mark, so we'd have 11 years of funding at a certain amount. So if there was a flood of them, you would wanna check in, because maybe, oh, well, we have 4 applicants, we don't wanna get anything above the maximum. Right now, it's not applicable, but it could be. So if you were part of the, Mike, you were
Well, that
there.
makes sense, but we don't
We had a
have that
certain amount,
situation,
yeah.
so
Yeah,
let's
right,
just
yeah.
move forward.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I will just say, based on my connection with residents, that sentiment of this is the limit, and yes, you can ask for the moon, but that we have a limit. And yes, we might not have as many applicants right now, but I think for the public to see, this is what us as a community we've set this limit, and this is why we have that limit. I think it is really important that we continue to keep that fair and even.
Well, I guess,
It's not a grant, it's a loan.
yeah, for the loan program,
I'm sorry.
it's not like,
I thought that
remember,
was-
it keeps refunding itself. So the more loans we can make, the better the program is, the bigger it will get,
Yes.
the more loans we can make. It's not the
I
facade
apologize.
program where it's going down to 0. So
Correct.
I
I'm
think it's
sorry.
a different discussion of
Yeah.
100,000 might be awesome because we
For
need
sure.
loans. We don't have enough loans.
I understand, I'm sorry, I thought I thought that they were asking for a $40,000 facade grant.
No.
But they're asking for potentially a $40,000.
Over, like 100,
loan.
no, 40,000 is the limit, there's a reason for it,
Right,
there's a whole
right.
manual of why, that's the limit.
I
But-
apologize.
And then, if you wanna go above it, you can ask the CDA,
Okay.
just like the facade
Yeah,
grant,
okay.
that's a loan.
Sorry.
Okay,
It was
no,
misunderstood.
good question. Erica, do you have any other? Update
I just thought I needed to put on here and shout again that, there's a new owner of the previous Cat's property at 3575, and met with him and wants to be a great community partner and is looking at other portfolios.
Which one?
JM, this is 3575 for North Oakland.
Is that
Harvey's-
I thought that was a
Harvey's
while ago.
building.
Harley, okay,
Before
thanks.
Harley's lap.
I don't know the addresses yet.
So, he owns JM Remodeling and Select Properties LLC, so he does a lot of work in this part of the region, and just really wants to be a great community partner, so I'm looking forward to working with him and see what other
Great.
buildings he adds to the portfolio here in Shorewood.
Cool.
Okay.
I have a question.
And then-
Erica. So
Sorry.
Erica, did you,
Rebecca, I was just gonna ask a quick question on the letter from Jean Webb.
Mm.
If you wouldn't mind, I would like to reach out to it and just, I think I appreciate his letter. I think it's a very considered letter, and if nobody objects, I would like to just sit down with him and learn a little more about what he's thinking.
yeah, and in full disclosure, I did sit with him, and he's
Okay.
got some great ideas, so it would be
Okay.
worth your while.
Sounds like a great idea, Peter.
Okay.
I have a question for Erica, though, on her updates. I saw an email floating around on the vacant, or Rebecca and I, or who are you looking for input on that retail vacancy request?
What are you talking about,
The program.
the program? With that email that came from McKay, Justin McKay, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's his one.
Yeah, well, I voiced
Yes.
this before at the CDA that, there was a very interested retailer for the corner 4001 open space, and that will not be moving forward, and the bid has said, because we sent a letter out to the Dan Katz about it, that please look at this with open eyes, but yeah, that's not moving forward, so the bid would like to move forward in formally requesting the CDA to relook at the vacant registration program that has been drafted since 2017.
Can we get a copy of that? I know you sent it to the CDA.
Ours has it.
Oh,
That
you
was
do?
when I was the planner, I drafted it, and it came to
I
the
forgot.
CDA, and everything was put on a standstill
Yeah, she has that, she
until priorities and processes were set.
I think that's a good idea.
Mhm.
This has gone on for like 10 years.
Yeah.
It's our,
We
we
might
have a 10-year
conversation.
time limit.
Mr. Katz does not support any retailers in that building.
No.
Why?
Because
It's
he
not a
hates-
good investment, it's not
he hates
financially
money.
sound, he firmly, quote unquote, says retail's dead, so.
Who, Cats? Is that what you said?
Dan Katz, yeah.
But
I
vacant,
haven't- I
but
had phone
vacant
conversations
retail
with him.
is hot.
Well, I don't know what to just say, this
I mean,
is why
what-
I really want markets.
what does that mean?
We've had
I don't know.
11%
Yeah, it's hoping you
vacancy rate
would have some
for 10
perspective
years.
on that.
So
Yeah, I wish I did.
maybe our market is
If I could
just
make money
that,
in
unless we
vacant
bring
retail,
in
I'd buy it all
daytime.
day long.
I don't
But
agree
how
with
much
that
of that
statement.
11% is Dan Katz owned?
I'm just saying that it switches though, your mamas will be there, like, it's been very steady at 11% for about 10 years.
No, I would not agree with that percentage, is just how you look at it. You know, if you just look at storefronts, then it's at 7%, we have 140 storefronts, and if you just count off them, that's the percentage you should use to separate office.
Either way, I'm
And
just
it's hard to
saying,
track office because people come and go in these 200 square foot offices, and they subcontract, so,
it just would be, a market study would help to say.
See, my understanding is it's gonna be on the board agenda for future consideration, and if it is moved forward, then it would be a matter of shifting other actions or priorities of, staff and the CDA or whoever to take a second look at what that program actually says and how it, in reality would work. And so I believe the board on Monday will be discussing, how to move forward with it. So if that's, how the bid and trustee McKeg want to do it, that's the new process moving forward. So it is there.
It's on future agenda items.
Correct.
Is that it? I
I-
think we're done.
Yeah, can I just say one thing, and I can forward this article out, but I had read this article about landlord greed responsible for vacant storefronts in New York, and I just thought it was very fascinating,
I
kind
think
of
I
to
read
your
that
point.
same.
Yeah, so it
Yeah,
just, I
send it
mean,
out.
yeah.
Or if you wanna send it to me, I can
Yeah,
also send it out to
yeah,
the board.
Sure, and it's just been interesting, I mean, that in the city, in Manhattan, that they're having, kind of some of the same struggles that we're having, and,
Crisis.
right.
Yeah.
All right.
It also
Sorry.
is, I
Motion to
have
adjourn.
heard, just to
Yes.
share, I have heard from a lot of the food and beverage industry, probably like 4 operators, that they're feeling the pinch as we add more, because we can only eat out a certain amount, and so they actually take some of the, so anyways, I'm starting to hear that from some of the food and beverage entities that we have here.
I think we should motion to adjourn.
Go.
Yep.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you, everybody.
Peter.
Rebecca, I'll send you that.
Yeah, no, that'd be great, thank you.